Hi everybody, welcome to this now going back to week 3 because I lost all my recordings to the 11-12 biology seminar. This week is not the most exciting week. It's learning about anatomy and physiology. Focus on 2 of the systems. I'm not going to try and teach all 12 systems in one go. We'll be here for far too long. So I'm going to go through the bones, the skeleton, and the respiratory system. So, anatomy is the study of where everything is. Anatomy is the study of where everything is. We have the macroscopic, which is what you can see, and the microscopic anatomy, which is what you can't see. Physiology studies how it all works. Why it works, and then I'll take it one step further. We also have pathophysiology, which is the study of why the physiology doesn't work, and basically the study of diseases. So I just taught this with the Year 12 HSC. I might actually even use the whiteboard just to break it up. So homeostasis is the, I'll put this all on here, but I'm not going to speak off the slides. It's the normal state of the body. The body has what we call negative feedback loops, which when there is a break in homeostasis, the body undertakes a certain process which reverses that change and it goes back to normal. Diabetes is the perfect classic example of a disease in which homeostasis cannot be restored naturally. So a person needs insulin in order to maintain and manage good blood sugar levels. I shouldn't say good, because it's not really a technical term. To maintain normal blood sugar levels. In the pathway of homeostasis, or this negative feedback loop, the insulin can't be produced, and so the blood sugar levels can't be brought down naturally. So we have to use insulin, and thus we have a disease. So we've gone through this. We have atoms make up the compounds, make up the cells, make up the tissues, makes up the organs, which makes up the systems, makes up the organism. See, and then we have the entire organism. So we have the integumentary system, the nervous system, the skeletal system, the endocrine system, the muscular system, cardiovascular system, lymphatic, urinary, respiratory, digestive, reproductive. And I will briefly go over each of these. And then we'll focus on the skeletal system and the respiratory system. So, integumentary system is the skin, hair, sweat glands, and nails. It protects against environmental hazards. It helps regulate the body temperature and provides sensory information. I'll quickly work through these, but we'll look at each of the other systems for maybe 10 or 15 minutes each. So the nervous system, the big one, brain, spinal cord, all of the nerves in the peripheries, as well as our sense organs. So if you break your spine, unfortunately, none of the messages come from here, get past where you break your spine. So if you break your spine down here, then you lose feeling below this point. You lose it, break it here, feeling below this point. And up here is the breathing control center for the brain. So you've got a little knobby bit on the back of your head. Knobby bit on the back of your head. And underneath that is your C1 vertebrae. And that's where the breathing control center. So if you fall back and people hit their head, and you see there's people that have in a wheelchair with a ventilator, that's unfortunately what's happened. So you get these messages being sent from here to all reaches of the body. So skeletal systems, fairly obvious, the skeleton, but it's not just the bones, ligaments, tendons, the bone marrow itself inside the bones. And it provides the support and protection, stores calcium, and inside the bone marrow, it forms the white and red blood cells. Endocrine system, pituitary gland, thyroid, pancreas, adrenal, and it produces all of the hormones. So sexual development in puberty. Pancreas is for insulin production. So cardiovascular system, it's the heart, blood, and blood vessels. Distributes blood, water, and nutrients, and assists in distributing the heat and getting rid of heat out of the body. So, lymphatic system, you might have seen that when you get bitten by a spider, you'll see red lines going up your arms or bitten by something, and that's because this lymphatic system is the drainage system, and it runs through the skin, and when you get a bite, you end up not having, it doesn't end up going through the veins, but it will run through these lymphatic veins in your arm. So this looks really interesting. So the urinary system, major organs are the kidneys, the ureter, the urinary bladder, and the urethra. They excrete waste products from the blood, and they control water balance by regulating the volume of urine. And the kidneys are the most important part of this. So the respiratory system, major organs are parts where you breathe in your face, parts in your throat, and the alveoli in your chest. The alveoli are where the gas exchange occurs, and this provides oxygen to the bloodstream, removes carbon dioxide from the bloodstream, and produces sounds for our communication. Digestive system, teeth, all the way into your stomach, gallbladder, and pancreas. So this processes and digests food, absorbs and conserves water, absorbs nutrients, and stores energy. Male reproductive system produces the sperm cells as well as the male hormone, sex hormone. Female does the same thing. The difference between a male and female is that the reproductive organs for a female are on the inside. I'm going to focus on the skeletal system and the respiratory system. Functions of the skeletal system, they provide movement. So the muscle is attached to the bone via tendons and ligaments. It provides support, so the backbone through the spine keeps us upright, keeps our head up along with the muscles. So the bones protect the vital organs, so they protect the lungs and the heart from injury. You get a fractured rib, more than likely you will get some kind of damage to the lung. I broke my collarbone. Well, I didn't just break it, so I used a technical term, the clavicle, and I blew it apart into many pieces. And it went down and sat just above the top of my right lung. I wasn't allowed to move 2 weeks until I did the surgery. I had to sit and do very little. In the bones, we have this stuff called bone marrow. And this bone marrow is where all of the white and red blood cells are produced. So all the new blood, also the erythrocytes, are produced here. Also the white blood cells, so the immune cells, so the cells we use to fight off disease. We have, if you, I'm sure some of you have heard, if you break your leg really badly, big bone in your leg, your femur, you can actually bleed to death. Because it has such a rich vein of bone marrow that you can lose lots of blood. So most of your blood cells are produced in the top of your leg. Diseases of the bone marrow include leukemia and other blood cancers. So we store calcium in our bones. The more calcium you store in the bones, the denser and stronger they become. As you get older, and dare I say, as women get older, they store less calcium. Their bones become more brittle and they suffer from what's called osteoporosis. We have the axial, which is this middle front bit, which has the skull, the spine, the ribs, and the sternum. And then we have the appendicular skull, which is all the appendages of the body. Axial, big bit in the middle. Appendicular is everything. We have long bones in your arms, legs, and your fingers. They're long and straight. Short, and your wrists and ankles. We then have flat bones, flat head, which make up the skull and the sternum. They are for strength and protection. Long bones contain bone marrow. Then you have these, I can't remember what the technical name is, but we'll call them irregular. And they make up this strange shaped discs in your back that the spinal cord runs. So the composition of bone is 70% minerals, so calcium and phosphate. And then we have collagen and other proteins, and the rest is water. So we have compact. They are mechanical and they protect. And then we have spongy, which is what makes up the vertebrae. And we have the 4 different bone cells, which not hugely important, but there are 4 different bone cells. Bone is living. Bone is not just hard stuff. That's why when you break a bone, it's really, really painful. Partly because of the swelling, partly because the bone is a living part of you. It's not just a chunk of bone that is living. Long bone, the diaphysis, which is the middle part, epiphysis, which is the end. We have the proximal end here, and the distal. The proximal end is furthest from the nearest joint. So if I was to say this, your tibia and fibia in your leg, the distal end is the end that attaches to the ankle. The proximal end is the end that attaches to my knee. Sorry. So we have this yellow bone marrow here that produces blood cells. The diaphysis, which is the middle part, which is called the shaft of the bone. Then we have the proximal, so this is the closest to the joint, and the distal epiphysis. These are the ends of the bones here. And that's covered in cartilage, which attaches it to the joint. Don't know why Google Slides always does this to me. My slides. But that's what we just went through with the long one. So when we're looking at bone cells, under the microscope. They're called what we call osteocytes. And they transport nutrients and wastes through the bone. So collagen is the spongy part of the extracellular matrix of the bones. It gives them strength. There's unfortunately genetic diseases that cause the body to not produce the right kind of collagen, and they can quite literally bend their bones and their joints don't form. Compact bone. And you can see here why it's so painful to break the bone, because there are nerves running through it. It is living. Thank you, Benjamin Cummings, for the brilliant pictures. This is what they look like under a microscope. You've got cavities where the blood flows through. The outside of this is called the laminella, and these are the active parts of the bone. They call it spongy bone because it quite literally looks like a sponge. So we have the bones of the skull. It's major bones, 12 of them, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And made up of all these plates. Usually what happens in a serious head injury where you've got skull fractures, they'll take one of these plates out and let the pressure release through there. So, the vertebral column supported by intervertebral discs made of cartilage. So it has a normal S curvature here. Each of the vertebrae is given a name. So you've got cervical up here, thoracic here, lumbar here. What the heck just happened then?
Third.
Apparently something happened and I lagged out. So we'll start this again here. So we've got the true ribs, which are these. They're attached on both sides. One's attached to the sternum, one's attached to the spine. The false ribs 8, 9, and 10 are only attached to this sternum by this one piece of cartilage. The floating ribs are the ones at the back here. They're only attached to the spinal cord. This little xiphoid process. If you're doing the Heimlich maneuver on someone, what they used to find is this would snap off and pierce the liver. The liver sits about here. And that's why they say you don't do the Heimlich maneuver anymore. It's this little bit here. You can actually feel it. If you go in here, you can. It feels gross, but go right up to the bottom of your sternum. You can actually push that bone, and it will bend. So the clavicle, my favorite one. I have a metal clavicle now. It's just been filled with bone grafts. It's really quite thin, and what it does, if you fall backwards or you fall onto your shoulder, instead of transferring all that force onto your sternum, the collarbone of the clavicle is designed to break and deform to absorb it so that you don't break the sternum and affect your heart and lung. It's really quite painful. I broke mine into 3 pieces. And it wasn't the most pleasant thing to have injured. So the scapula is your shoulder blade back here. You can feel it. And it has 4 different muscles attached to it. And rotator cuffs and things that allow you to do this. The femur is the largest bone in the body. It's the one that has most of the bone marrow in it, and it's very, very big and strong. Recovering from a broken femur can take anywhere up to 2 years. If not longer than that, if it's a really bad break. Calcaneus, or the heel bone, where your Achilles tendon here. And this plantar fascia ligament. Plantar fasciitis is one of the most painful conditions they think people can go through. And that is just inflammation and tightening of this ligament. So, joints, where the skeleton meets. So, this bone and bone. If it was just bone on bone, it would be incredibly painful. So, some joints allow lots of mobility. The shoulder is a ball and socket. You can do this. Whereas the knuckles, it's a hinge joint. This one. So, classify them by their structure. Arthritis is inflammation of the joints, so arthrology is the study of them. Little or no movement, slight movement, and lots of movement. So ball and socket is like your hip and your shoulder. So ligaments, connect bone to bone. This little one here, this little disc, is really painful if you tear it on your knee. It's really, really uncomfortable. So tendons attach the muscles to the bone. Okay, so that was the skeletal system at a glance. Now let's look at the respiratory system. So, not the presentation that I want to use. Okay, now we're done. Merge the wrong things together. Now we're doing so. So, we're talking about the respiratory system. All we're talking about is gas exchange. This gas exchange is the exchange of oxygen and carbon dioxide. The exchange of oxygen into the tissue and carbon dioxide out of the tissue. And we breathe in oxygen and we breathe out carbon dioxide. So when you see the term aerobic, you know that it is oxygen dependent. So if we breathe in oxygen, then we are aerobic. If there's anaerobic organisms that don't require oxygen, like some bacteria, they use other things, sulfur as an example. We need oxygen. So we have, in animals, there's 4 different major kinds. External gills, lungs, internal gills, and tracheae, which is what you see insects. We need to take in more carbon dioxide. So we need to take in as much oxygen as we're breathing out carbon dioxide. If we add too much oxygen, then we begin to accumulate carbon dioxide. If we don't get enough carbon dioxide out, then you might as well not be breathing in any oxygen. Most disorders of the lungs either can't get enough oxygen in or can't get enough carbon dioxide out. if someone starts to hyperventilate, they're breathing in lots of oxygen and not breathing out any carbon dioxide. So it begins to build up in the blood, and that is really bad. So gas exchange surfaces, complex organisms have we have a high demand for gas exchange compared to a small organism. That's because we require more energy. Oxygen is used to produce energy. So we need more complex respiratory systems and gas exchange surfaces. And I'll give you 30 seconds to think. What is closely linked to the respiratory system? Which of the other systems is most closely linked with the others? With another. So with 30 seconds to think, and we can, I won't get you to say, but that's part of the question. So I will give you the answer. A nice guy. But the cardiovascular system. So if we're breathing in air and the heart needs to pump that around, then if one of those two fails, the other one will fail. And if you stop breathing very quickly, your heart will stop. If your heart stops, you very quickly stop breathing. Whereas some of the other systems can function for some time after. So ventilation refers to water moving over or across a gas exchange surface. And this energy is required to fuel the ventilation of the respiratory surfaces. So when we breathe in, we're actually using energy. So we're using energy to produce energy. So we have a macroscopic view. Over here, this macroscopic view. The lungs, trachea. See in old movies where someone was choking and they would just make a cut here and stick a pen tube in there and they'd start breathing again. So we've got all the ribs. The heart sits here in between the two lungs. And then the bronchiole, which are these bits. That's what they look like. And this design, what it does, it maximizes the surface area to volume ratio. And we have the alveolus. And then this is where, when we're getting onto these bits here, the CO2 is coming back on the red blood cells past the lung. So as it goes past, CO2 is transferred this way, and O2 is transferred through this thin film here. So pathway of oxygen during respiration. We breathe in the environmental air through the nasal cavity, into the pharynx, through the trachea down here, down to the bronchi, across to the bronchioles, into the alveoli, which goes into the blood, into circulation, to the tissues and cells. And then the cells use this to produce energy. So there's a type of asthma that says, or doesn't say, but if a person breathes in air that is too cold, they will have an allergic reaction. And that's because the air in the lungs needs to be a certain temperature. So in your nose, mouth, and throat, the air is moistened, filtered, and warmed as it passes through. There's all little bits in here that captures anything that doesn't want to go down the lungs. If you breathe in a pea or something when you eat it, not so bad if you're an adult, but sometimes with kids, they have to go in and remove it surgically because it will just sit in the lungs and decompose. The pharynx, which is the windpipe back of the throat. The trachea, which goes down to the bronchi, is where the first reaction in someone suffering from asthma. So we get down into the bronchi. The air passes through the bronchi. Again, there's mucus and cilia to catch anything that they don't want to go down into the lungs. Then we have the bronchioles, which branch off from each of the bronchus. So these two here. Then the alveoli are on the end. There's the veins running, or the capillaries running around here. And this is where the gas exchange happens. So, alveoli, this is what they look like. I mean, they probably don't look exactly like that, but pretty much like that. This is where the gas exchange, the air comes through, comes to here, the oxygen goes into these capillaries, and the CO2 comes out and goes back up, and we breathe it out. So there's a large surface area to volume ratio, about 70 meters squared. So thin layer of flattened cells with a rich vascular supply. So on the outside of this, there is a single layer of cells in which CO2 and O2 pass back and forth. So when I said before that if you get that break in your C-spine, that you sometimes stop breathing because your diaphragm is no longer working. So the lungs reside in the thorax. The thorax is completely enclosed, and it keeps the lungs expanded. So this whole thorax here is designed to keep the lungs expanded. And under that, at the back, is the diaphragm. So it acts like a suction pump. So I said that breathing in requires energy, breathing out does not require energy. So inhalation, breathing in, requires energy, and then using this recoil, I don't have to actively breathe out. The air will be pushed out of my lungs by this recoil from the diaphragm. So, elastic recoil of the thorax, which is caused by the diaphragm, breathes out. So inhalation, the ribs raise outwards and the diaphragm contracts inwards. You can feel that with the way your chest goes when you take a deep breath. Breathe out, the ribs move back down and your chest relaxes. So getting to the end of this. So tidal volume is the volume of air moved in and out at each breath. And this varies according to how much oxygen we need. So if we look at it, the need for oxygen depends on our activity level. So the vital capacity is the maximum volume of air that we can move in and out of our lungs. The normal resting levels, so what we're breathing now, is a lot less than this vital capacity. And when we breathe in, we can't breathe in and out at the same time. So it's a one-way system, which makes it a little bit inefficient. And what happens is when we're breathing out, we don't quite breathe everything out. So there's air that gets stuck in there that's called stale air. So we never ever actually take a full breath of air. So that volume of air that's left is called the residual volume. So tidal volume. And we have total lung volume, which you can see from top to bottom. Then we have the reserve volume, which is how much is left. So you can see that we have, so our lungs have a really, really high total lung volume. But it's the amount that if we breathed in the total amount of air that we could breathe all the time, we would waste a huge amount of energy. So, finish on the pathophysiology of the lungs. Cat really loudly meowing. So, if we don't have efficient gas exchange, then we either can't survive or our quality of life is severely diminished. People with asthma have a diminished, when they're having an asthma attack, it's diminished quality of life. People with emphysema, people with bronchitis, cystic fibrosis, they all have a reduced quality of life and higher risk of death, because this process of breathing is so important, I mean, for obvious reasons. So the exchange through the respiratory system is essential for life. And then we have these, and most of these, or some of these, are diseases of lifestyle choices. So emphysema is typically a disease of smoking. It can also be caused by environmental pollutants, as well as secondhand smoke, and what's the other one? I can't remember now. Anyway, so it's the alveoli actually rupture because the lining becomes damaged. So chronic bronchitis. People with emphysema often cough up blood because that alveoli that's surrounded by it, the capillaries, ruptures and bleeds into the lungs. Chronic bronchitis, inflammation of the bronchial tubes and damage to the alveoli. So, don't know if you've heard a kid with bronchitis cough, but it is a horrible hacking cough that doesn't seem to ever go away. Asthma is a three-stage process where the bronchioles constrict, the lining thickens, and you get excess mucus. So you get a crackly sort of sound, or wheezing sound when you listen to it under a stethoscope. And if it gets really bad, you can actually hear someone with asthma breathing with a wheeze. So it's a really off-putting sound. And when you hear it, working in hospitals, you get very worried. Cystic fibrosis is a genetic disorder where the body does not know how to, doesn't know how thick to make this mucus. So it makes this mucus that's normally the right thickness for allow for all this flow of oxygen. And over time that it causes blockages and just progressively gets worse and worse. A person with cystic fibrosis, perhaps 20 years ago, 10 years ago, may have had a life expectancy in their 20s. Now it's well into the 40s and 50s. And smoking, it damages everything. I mean, telling people not to smoke in this day and age seems a little strange, because there's so much evidence, we know exactly what it does. And I will leave that there for today. Sorry if you're watching the recording, there's a few hiccups there, but we got there in the end. And I'll keep uploading these recordings. I'll do this one live, and I'll do the next one this week in the middle of the week, and I'll do 2 a week till the end, and we'll be all caught up. I've done